Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Fertilizer Matters.
And I am Taylor Zavala, Deputy Editor of the North American Fertilizer Report. It's great to be here. And Calder, while you, I, and Argus already know fertilizer matters, many others are learning also, as it has become a bit more of a mainstream talking point with the Strait of Hormuz still effectively closed. As fertilizer has topped headlines, the topic has drawn more eyes, including those of politicians and the federal government.
Yes, Taylor, always a pleasure talking shop with you, and honestly, this episode has been a long time coming. So there's a lot to cover, but the sun is also not set on this story either. In fact, there is so much to be revealed.
Right. I mean, it's really been fascinating seeing how the North American fertilizer market has behaved since the US-Israel war with Iran began in early March, right ahead of the spring application season.
Yeah, and some interesting trades have taken place these last couple months. As you said, we are heading into the final weeks of the spring season, and we have seen fertilizer prices at New Orleans, our major import hub, hit multi-year highs. Yet fertilizer tons are being imported into New Orleans and then being placed back on the vessels to be re-exported to other countries. Re-exports are not uncommon at New Orleans, but they typically won't occur until after the spring season has been tucked away. As one would guess, it takes some pretty extreme circumstances in the markets for this to happen.
And we have had no shortage of extreme circumstances. The war in the Middle East has been ongoing and really starting at a time of already elevated sulfur prices. With the future of the Strait of Hormuz now in question, phosphate prices as well as feedstock costs, including sulfur, sulfuric acid, and ammonia, are now also significantly higher. This has really been a shock to the global phosphate market, as you have phosphate tons loaded onto vessels in the Mideast Gulf that are unable to traverse the Strait of Hormuz. And then you have the products necessary to produce phosphate also at higher pricing levels that make the production costs extremely elevated as well. So for the US market in particular, traders here cannot rely on tons to be shipped over by Saudi Arabia, and traders also cannot rely on domestic producers or producers outside of the Mideast Gulf because those producers can barely afford to continue output. This has in turn created a very elevated phosphate pricing situation, which is making it quite difficult for US farmers and growers to afford phosphate tons for the spring as well.
Right, so next, maybe you can explain how traders decided they would rather export phosphate than send product upriver where you think there would be high demand.
Yeah, so essentially, US traders are seeing how much higher DAP and MAP tons are priced at other global indexes, where there is also significant demand. And for many US farmers, phosphate prices are high here as well. But affordability has been such a blatant concern for the fertilizer industry, traders have essentially decided, okay, well, if I keep tons here, I'll probably have a difficult time selling them, and then they will be sold at much lower prices. So suddenly there is an incentive as a trader to take your highly desired phosphate tons and sell them to meet demand elsewhere in the globe.
We have seen similar dynamics play out in the urea market as well. 35% of global urea trade flows through the Middle East, and about 30% of US imports originate in the region as well. Meanwhile, LNG exports from Qatar have halted, tightening gas markets and causing some producers to curtail nitrogen production. Most notably among them is India. That has forced India to enter the market, where they have secured 2.5 million tons of product, leaving the US, Australia, and other importers fighting for scraps. We have confirmed 45,000 tons of re-exports so far, with another couple cargoes potentially on the way. There is also widespread speculation that some urea will be exported from the US to India, but that has yet to be confirmed.
Right, and this big Indian urea buy tender has also been shaking up Nola urea prices as well.
Yes, while urea prices have retreated quite a bit in the US as of the 13th of May, in the heart of the spring buying at Nola, where traders needed to position tons for applications, there were initial reports of re-exports that sent the Nola urea price to almost $800 a short ton, or about 60% higher than the price of urea at the start of the conflict. But more importantly, if you were to price the peak of urea this spring as a ratio to the price of corn at the time, urea was the least affordable it has been since Argus started pricing urea at the port. As you can imagine, this made business really tough for the American farmer, which is an important political constituency in the US. Now, Taylor, this has been your wheelhouse as of late. It would be interesting for our listeners to hear about how politicians and government officials are reacting to conditions that farmers are now facing.
Of course. So, starting out very generally, at the end of April, U.S. Department of Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins held a press conference with a wide range of cabinet members and other government officials to give a rundown on short and long term actions being taken to ease these higher U.S. fertilizer prices. She cited actions the government has recently taken, such as the extension of the Jones Act waiver that has allowed ammonia to move more freely from U.S. ports, to assisting in a Department of Justice investigation that the administration hopes will strengthen domestic fertilizer market competition, and also actions the government has taken with big domestic players here in the U.S. to help boost production in the short term and long term.
And whether we see these efforts succeed at lowering the cost for American farmers or not, it has been very interesting to see this administration give fertilizer all this attention. Some of that attention has been very critical, while other attention has been more positive. We had US President Donald Trump post that he will start, quote, not accept price gouging from the fertilizer monopoly, end quote. Not sure how to unpack that statement, but it's significant nonetheless. We have also had Brooke Rollins praise CF Industries for delaying a spring turnaround and saying they are working to accelerate permitting for CF's Blue Point ammonia project. When have you ever heard an official comment on a nitrogen plant's maintenance schedule?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So to bring this back to re-exports, this type of attention has sparked widespread speculation in the urea market that traders are waiting until after the spring season to re-export as to not attract unwanted attention from this administration.
This conflict has also renewed focus on phosphate countervailing duties on Morocco. Before the conflict, we had the Deputy Secretary of Agriculture criticize the countervailing duties while calling producers Nutrien and Mosaic a duopoly. Since then, we have had a bill introduced by Senator Roger Marshall from Kansas that would revoke the countervailing duties that have been in place since 2021.
Taylor, do you think removing the CVDs would have a big impact on the phosphate market and potentially lower the cost of fertilizer for US farmers?
In the long run, I think it certainly could, but the short-term impact is much less clear. With so little clarity available on when the Strait of Hormuz will open and how long phosphate feedstock costs will be higher, it might not do much to offset this massive supply shock in the short term. There is also the ongoing sunset review of countervailing duties on Morocco and Russia. So even if we don't see any action taken by our legislators, we could see the countervailing duties removed anyways. Between the conflict and the countervailing duties, it does not look like a rosy path forward for the phosphate market, at least for now.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Fertilizer Matters, and thanks for joining, Taylor.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.